Welcome to this webinar on best practice fraud and travel and expenses management. My name is Cesar Bacani, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of CFO Innovation Asia. We have chosen to highlight workplace fraud in this webinar because it can be a serious problem in many companies, particularly in the current uncertain economic and business environment. According to a 2012 report by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, the typical organization loses 5% of its revenue to fraud each year. Fiddling with travel and expenses is one of the ways that employees commit fraud. T&E, as you know, is a very significant item in corporate budgets. It is typically the third largest business expense after salary and wages and data processing. With us today to discuss this important topic are Annie Chan, board member of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, Hong Kong chapter, and managing director as well at Mazars Asia Pacific, and Christopher Juneau, senior marketing director, Asia Pacific at Concur Technologies. Annie will share with us her on-the-ground experience in forensic accounting, focusing on case studies that reveal the typical red flags that signal fraud in Asian companies, fraud investigation, and fraud detection and prevention. For his part, Chris will discuss Concur's approach to enable enterprises to identify and minimize potential fraud, which includes the use of technology and human services such as well-trained auditors and forensic accountants. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone to type in your questions inside the Ask a Question box on the left side of your screen and then press the Submit button. You can ask any question anytime during the presentations. Let's hear first from Annie.
Thank you very much, Cesar. I have 20 years experience in forensic and fraud investigation. I lead the forensic and investigation team in Mazars, Hong Kong, China. Mazars is an international CPA firm specializing in audit, tax, and advisory services. And in Asia, we've got 2,200 professionals. In China, we've got 600 professionals in Hong Kong, Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shanghai. Now, in the next 20 minutes, what I would like to do is, firstly, I will define what is forensic accounting, and then I will link forensic accounting to fraud investigation. I will then outline in terms of fraud prevention and detection, as well as explain how fraud investigation is conducted. And then at the end, I will share with you some real-life cases in terms of fraud investigation in China and Hong Kong. Let us start. In terms of forensic accounting, it is a discipline that deals with the relationship and application of financial facts as they relate to legal issues in a court of law. And forensic accounting is a very important tool that assists in the investigation of crimes such as bribery, fraud, money laundering, and other white-collar crimes all over the world. Now, people would ask me, hey, Annie, what is forensic accountant? What do they do? Who are they? Now, basically, forensic accountants very often act as financial and fraud investigators. We are often engaged to conduct fraud investigation whenever there is allegations of fraud or issues of misappropriation of funds and assets, etc. in companies. Well, basically, we identify issues, problems, by gathering information, documents. Say, for example, we look at accounting ledgers, we look at contracts, we look at all the supporting documentation relating to the issues at hand, and then we analyze these documents as well as analyze people, How do we analyze people? Basically, we will interview people and collect the information from people, and then we combine the documentary proof and the verbal evidence, and then we come up with a fact-finding report setting out exactly what happened, what went wrong. And in most of the cases, we also quantify, say, what sort of assets has been misappropriated and the value of the loss. And very often, we also act as expert witnesses in court. And in terms of what we do, basically, we help companies in terms of fraud prevention and detection. We explained how we can, say, set up systems and control to prevent and detect fraud from happening. And whenever there are potential allegations of fraud, then we would have to investigate. And in terms of issues where companies are facing regulatory review or having investigations from regulators, we help companies basically in assisting them in handling the issues, questions, and assist them in making sure that they comply with the rules and the laws, and to handle the regulators. And apart from that, we also conduct internal controls in order to find out, say, what are the current systems, and this allows companies to prevent and detect fraud. Whenever there are, say, fraud or irregularities, say, for example, money has been misappropriated, assets has been taken away, then we assist clients in tracing the assets. And very often we are involved in terms of tracing the bank statements, in terms of finding out where the funds have gone. And this often happens in anti-money laundering investigations and anti-money laundering review. And very often our clients are regulators, listed companies, audit committee of listed companies, as well as directors, board of directors of companies. And apart from that, we also provide litigation support to lawyers, in-house counsel, and of course, we also act as experts in court. So that's what we do, and that sets the scene as to why forensic accountants are involved in fraud investigations. And let's move on. What is fraud? Based on the Hong Kong Institute of Chartered Public Accountants Handbook, Hong Kong Standard of Auditing 240, fraud refers to an intentional act by one or more individuals among management, those charged with governance, employees, or third parties involving the use of deception to obtain an unjust or illegal advantage. Very often, here we are talking about occupational fraud, i.e. fraud in the workplace. Now, let's have a look at the next slide. What are the elements of fraud? We often talk about the fraud triangle. Basically, the three elements which are essential for fraud to happen is, firstly, there has to be an opportunity, and then there is a motive, and finally, a rationalization. What do we mean by that? Say, for example, in terms of opportunity, well, say, for example, where there is an internal control weakness which gives the fraudster an opportunity to manipulate the system of the company and to conduct fraud. And apart from that, what do we mean by motive? Basically, say, for example, a motive to obtain financial advantage. This is a motive. Say, for example, in terms of rationalization, very often when I conduct my investigation, fraudsters tend to give them excuses. Say, for example, I am not stealing any money from the company. I'm just borrowing the funds. I will repay, but you find out before I repay. And apart from that, we often hear people say, everyone else is doing this. This is common practice in China. I am not hurting anyone. So these are rationalization, i.e. excuses of fraudsters. Let's have a look at the 2012 report to the nations on occupation fraud by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. As Caesar has rightly pointed out, a typical organization loses 5% of its annual revenue to fraud. That's very serious. And more than $3.5 trillion was lost to fraud in 2011. Frauds lasted a median of 18 months before they're being detected. But of course, from my experience, very often, while complex frauds last 4 to 5 years before they are detected. Apart from that, the report to the nation also mentioned more than 87% of the fraudsters had never been previously charged or convicted for a fraud-related offense. This is very serious. It tells us that you cannot tell who is a fraudster from the face or from the record, because 87% of the fraudsters have never been charged or convicted for a fraud-related offense before. So this is interesting. Let's have a look at the Transparency International's 2012 Corruption Perceptions Index. It sets out the perceived level of public sector corruption in 176 countries all over the world. As you can see in the slide, Denmark, Finland, and New Zealand ranked the top, i.e. they are the cleanest countries. They are perceived to be the cleanest countries all over the world. Let's have a look at the bottom. Well, countries like Myanmar rank 172 among the 176 countries all over the world. And apart from that, say Afghanistan, North Korea, Somalia, they rank 174 at the low quadrant. And let's have a look. What about Hong Kong and China? Hong Kong ranked 14, so it's not too bad, but there is room for improvement. What about China? China ranked 18, India ranked 94, Philippines 105, Indonesia 118. So as we can see from this Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, well, quite a lot of Asian countries are at the lower end, and that's why, it gave us a lot of business opportunities in terms of fraud investigation. But of course, fraud investigation is costly. The best way is to prevent and detect fraud. Now, let's have a look at what we can do in terms of fraud prevention. As I said, the key is to create a fraud-averse environment, because fraud happens anytime, anywhere, any place. What should we do? Say, for example, we need to set deterrents. What are they? Physical deterrent, system deterrent, and psychological deterrent. What do we mean by that? For physical deterrent, I mean adding locks, passwords control, 24-hour surveillance, security guards. These are simple, but very often these are overlooked. What about system control? Now, in terms of system control, the key is make sure that you have proper documentary trail, audit trail in terms of the documents and your records. Make sure that you have proper authorization in terms of payment. And apart from that, supervision and control, segregation of duties is very important, because without proper segregation of duties, manipulation can happen. And this gives the fraudster a loophole to start stealing funds and money or assets of companies. New employee vetting is very important, because one bad apple can spoil the barrel. It is important to make sure that you have a good corporate culture and all the employees understand exactly what is expected of them in terms of having proper corporate culture, proper ethical standard. And it is important for you to do proper vetting, background check of new employees, especially people who are at the top level, top senior management level, as well as those who handles cash and funds, say, for example, your chief accountant, your accounting staff, etc. Apart from that, anonymous complaint hotline, whistleblowers hotline is very important, and I'm going to touch on that in a minute. And apart from that, it is also important to ensure that you have a good internal audit team to conduct the internal audit on a regular basis. If not, then you would have to consider, say, outsourcing it to external firms to make sure that you have this role of internal audit. This gives a system deterrent. What about psychological deterrent? Now, make sure that you have proper internal control in place. Fraud awareness training is crucial. This fraud awareness training has to be provided to all your staff, because they will act as your ear, your eyes. They can tell you whenever they see anything which is abnormal. Make sure that your staff understand what is required in terms of the code of conduct, the ethical standard of the company. Corporate culture is definitely important to ensure that fraud will not happen, or at least minimize possible fraud. Atmosphere to discuss problem is important, because, whenever employees, they see any irregular matters, they would like to, say, at least notify their boss, notify their senior. And it is important for senior management to ensure that you set up a proper atmosphere to allow staff to raise their grievances, to raise issues with you before it is too late. Anti-fraud policy is crucial. Why is that? It is important to stress this because, all employees of a company need to know what are the anti-fraud policy of a particular company that they are working in. Tone at the top is very important. The management needs to set as an example. Management needs to stress that they have a consistent approach to incidents. Whenever there is fraud, irregularities, misbehavior, they are going to end up with dismissal, recovery of assets misappropriated, report to police or other regulatory authorities. And of course, if the fraudster is the senior management, then you would have to report to the board of directors or the audit committee, or at the end of the day, to report directly to the regulator. So this anti-fraud policy has to be in place, and it has to be monitored and to be disclosed and communicated to all staff. Now, let's have a look at how fraud is detected. This is based on the report to the nation of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. As we can see, the top three comprise of tips, management review, and internal audit. So it gives without saying that these are the most important detection tools. And tips is at the top. It comprises of 43%. So that's why, as I explained before, your employees, your staff, they act as your eyes and ears. They give you tips before anything goes out of control. Let's have a look at the next slide. The source of tips, employee comprise of more than 50% of the tips. So that's why they are important assets of your company. Customers rank second, and anonymous tips rank the next. So it shows how tips is important in terms of detection of fraud. Now, how should we do to put these together? Well, the important thing is, I would suggest that you trust your employee, but verify. Trust, but verify. Use professional skepticism to deal with all these issues. You need to observe and watch out for red flags. What do we mean by red flags? Say, for example, sudden loss of a major customer, invoices are duplicates. Say, for example, supplier's address equals an employee address. For example, you see that there's increasing debtor sales ratio. For example, the level of expenses is inconsistent with the level of production. That gives you red flag. Apart from that, if you have increasing sales, but cash flow continue to be tight, that is a red flag. Say, for example, you have decreasing profit margin, but this is inconsistent with the industry while the industry is doing well. Why is that so? This is a red flag, and you need to be aware of when you see a number of red flags, then you need to consider whether you need to investigate. So you need to listen to your staff, listen to individuals, say, around your workplace, make inquiries, say, internal inquiries or external inquiries, say, chat with your customers, chat with your suppliers. Now, I mentioned documentary proof, documentary evidence is very important, and that's why very often we need to compare. What do we compare? We need to compare the financial performance before the year end and after the year end, because very often manipulation was done before the year end, but will reverse after the year end. We examine whatever is too high or too low. So these are unusual trends. We determine the pattern. If the pattern does not look correct, then you need to investigate. And apart from that, you have to integrate personal behavior with the circumstances. Say, for example, a particular staff member has a financial difficulties, and all the bad debts concentrate on this particular sales staff. Then this may give another red flag to allow you to proceed with investigation. So how do we investigate? You need to ensure that you have a proper internal team, the right internal team, who you can trust. Very often, you do not know who's the fraudster, whether there is a team of fraudsters, any corroboration among the workplace. So what you need to do is to find a good mix of your internal team in terms of the investigation. And very often, you would have to use your in-house legal counsel, your human resources director, your compliance officer, etc. Of course, every case is different. An external team, you make sure that you engage an independent and experienced external team to help you with the investigation. Make sure that you don't engage your auditor, because your auditor may not be independent in terms of a fraud or misappropriation of assets or misappropriation of funds, because there will be a conflict of interest. And make sure that you engage a team who is experienced in this area, because, you need to act quick. Say, for example, documents may be destroyed before the investigator comes. Evidence may be destroyed, right? So that's very important. Now, in terms of the investigation approach, normally we will interview management, the operations staff, the accountant. We will review the accounting records and the major contracts together with all the supporting documentation. And we'll conduct investigation of suspicious transaction. Say, for example, interview third party, collect third party independent document, and we may also conduct company searches. At the end of the day, the objective is to understand what happened, what went wrong, and how was fraud conducted, i.e. the modus operandi, and quantify the loss if possible and collect evidence for trial. So that explains what we do in terms of investigations. Next, let me share with you some of my real-life cases. Let's have a look at case 1. This is in relation to a Hong Kong securities broker. It is a medium-sized brokerage firm in Hong Kong. It involves misappropriation of clients' funds, and there are internal control deficiencies. Basically, a customer of the brokerage firm complained to the SFC, Securities and Futures Commission, the regulator, and complained misappropriation of assets and fraud. And so we were engaged to investigate what happened and the vivacity of the claim. And basically, we interviewed the management and the staff, and we reviewed the company policies and procedures and the internal control system. And the finding is that the claimant's addresses were altered by the fraudster without authorization. Basically, the fraudster is an account executive within the brokerage firm, and this fraudster has been trusted by a lot of her clients, and she told her clients to sign blank checks and deposit funds to the fraudster's personal bank account. This looks stupid, right? It happened, and it involved 40 clients, and it involved Hong Kong dollar 40 million as funds misappropriated. And you would say these customers must be, say, old women who doesn't understand, fraud, etc. The answer is no. Basically, most of her clients are medical doctors, university professors, accountants, lawyers. So you will believe that these professionals would not have done this to provide signed blank check to the fraudster, but it happened. Why did it happen? The reason is trust. They trust the fraudster because they have been doing business with the fraudster for more than 7 years, and they trusted her. So I always tell people, trust, but verify. So what's the outcome? The fraudster was jailed for 3.5 years, and the most important consequence is that the broker had to compensate in full to all the victims. And basically, it involved financial loss, i.e., the brokerage firm has to repay the 40 million to the victims. Apart from that, there is also reputational loss. And at the end of the day, the broker was reprimanded by the regulator. So that explains how costly fraud is. let's have a look at case 2. It is a United States IT company located in Shanghai. Basically, following a whistleblower's complaint, the legal counsel in the United States instructed us to lead a fraud investigation and forensic accounting project to look at the China operation of the company. The complaint was in relation to inflation of revenue, falsification of expenses, and bribery. And basically what we have done is we scrutinized the revenue and the expenses for the relevant periods. We interviewed the management and the staff. We found out that there were fictitious sales. Basically, sales booked at the end of quarter 2, 3, and 4 were reversed in quarter 1 of the following year. And that's why, as I explained before, you need to look at what are the figures before the year end and after the year end. Because very often manipulations were done in these circumstances. We found out that cash payments were also made to individuals, while a company said, which was a dummy company to cover up fraudulent transactions and bribes. Furthermore, we found out that bogus transactions were used to cover up cash and gifts made by the account executives to third parties in helping to secure business. Gifts such as mobile phones, expensive handbags, silk scarves, these were made. And we also found out that some of these payments were made to officials of state-owned enterprise. What's the problem? It violated both the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and also the local bribery laws. That's very serious. So the company ended up paying substantial financial penalty to the U.S. government and having problems in terms of the local government. So it suffered serious reputational loss. So these give us some insight as to how fraud happened, what went wrong, and basically this is the system, the control, which is lacking. So I think that's what I would like to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie, for that very interesting but rather scary presentation. Once again, let me remind everyone to type in your questions inside the Ask a Question box on the left side of your console and then press the Submit button. You can ask any question anytime during the presentations. Let us now listen to Concur's Chris Juneau. Chris?
Thank you, Cesar. Again, everyone, thank you for joining the webinar. My name is Christopher Juneau. I've been with Concur over 12 years, and I'm responsible for marketing across Asia Pacific. The reason I'm following Annie to discuss the identification and prevention of fraud within the expense claim process is because travel and expense is typically, on average, represents 7 to 10% of a company's budget. And based on some of the statistics that Annie shared with all of you, a percentage of fraud occurring within 7 to 10% of a company's budget could represent a significant financial impact to the company. So before I go into more details on how we identify and potentially prevent fraud, let me tell you a little bit about Concur, and then we'll go right into the details. Concur is the largest T&E cloud platform provider. Through our cloud-based technology since 1993, we've been automating the online travel booking and expense claim processes for companies of all sizes, from 50 employees to 100,000 employees. On a yearly basis, our technology processes over $50 billion annually regarding expense claims from corporate users within over 100 countries, representing 15 million users. That's why we are the leader in corporate travel booking and expense claim automation. But more specifically, on a daily basis, users log in with their web browser, either their laptop, tablet, or smartphone. And we have approximately 500,000 users logging in daily, processing 200,000 expense reports, booking over 80,000 trips, and we're reimbursing employees or their corporate cards provided by their company by approximately $24 million daily. So we process a lot of transactions, automate the expense reporting process on a broad global scale for organizations of all sizes. And consequently, part of our responsibility in the service we deliver is the identification and or prevention of potentially fraudulent transactions in the expense reporting process. So let's talk about what is expense fraud. I thought the definition which Annie gave earlier, where she described as fraud as being an unjust or legal advantage. Let's face it, an employee is potentially taking revenue or funds which is not due them. And what are the most common things that we see in terms of fraud? And here's just a few very small examples. We see within organizations expense reporting process. First would be what I would call below-the-line expenses. That is where your organization has publicly stated as part of your policy that you will only reimburse a certain amount of a given expense type. As an example, your company may have a stated policy of only reimbursing so many dollars for breakfast or so many dollars for dinner. Well, employees understand the policy, and therefore not to trigger audits or other red flags or visual cues to alert the audit staff that there may be something going on, they consistently submit expenses slightly below the policy. They're not violating the policy, but they may be over-exaggerating their expenses, therefore depriving the company of funding. Second, of course, overstating the charges. Third, claiming fictitious bills. Anyone with a color printer and Photoshop and so forth can on their own create a hotel folio bill as an example. And then another example we've seen occur often is what I call the downgrading dilemma. Employee says they've booked one class of service, be it on an airline or booked into a hotel, but then actually they still take a flight or stay in a hotel room, but actually stay in a much cheaper hotel room, deposit the difference, but submit the bill for the higher. So those are just a few examples. But again, at the end of the day, it's an unjust or legal advantage to defraud the company of money. So at Concur, we propose a two-pronged approach for organizations of all sizes as they look to prevent and identify potential fraud through their expense claim process. The two components are automate the process. And specifically, we recommend automating via cloud technology. Within our cloud technology, we take a systemic end-to-end approach, starting all the way from the travel request process, the travel booking to the expense claim. Second, the manager component of that systemic process is key. So enabling the manager to easily and effectively review and interrogate expenses as they wish makes it easier to provide that extra control from a management perspective. Third, I'll highlight examples of how we believe that enabling users to complete the expense claim process via smartphone or tablet device actually may deter fraud. And then fourth, the analytical component of analyzing the information, as Annie was pointing out, looking for discrepancies within your data, and you have richer data through that automation. So that is automation. The second prong is human services. I believe I heard Annie mention 2 or 3 times the requirement for having an independent third party. As she pointed out, one of the high frequencies with regard to fraud is identified is employees turning other employees in. Well, one of the reasons we recommend an independent third-party auditor, especially in smaller companies, is those employees doing the audit may know the employees and therefore, as Annie was saying, may trust that employee and therefore be more reluctant to verify potentially fraudulent transactions. So let's get into a little more detail. with regard to automation of the travel and expense process. So we believe by taking an end-to-end approach, therefore automating the process from start to finish, whether your organization has a travel authorization process, whether you utilize an online booking tool or not, but automating the process from beginning to end so your policy is in front of the employee constantly, so you have complete audit trail of the employee's actions. And what do they say they're purchasing? What travel they say they're reserving? All the way to the manager and to your back office and accounting staff. As we said, having an automated process brings your travel policy to life, providing immediate visual guilt, guiding your employees to do business with the preferred vendors by showing your employees what they should be paying for either air or hotel. Automation forces certain actions, specifically hotel itemization. As transactions come in and either identified by the corporate card, SIC code, or other merchant identifiers that this is a hotel, forcing the employee to itemize given folios, given bills, to detail how much was the room rate. Did you take from the mini bar? Did you watch a movie? Third, requiring employees to track who they're entertaining. As Annie mentioned, talking about the example of fraud, especially with regard to pharmaceutical, there's very stringent regulations in the U.S. and that are emerging elsewhere in the world regarding limitations on how much pharmaceutical sales can spend per doctor. Ultimately in the U.S. requiring pharmaceutical companies to report on the entertainment spending on a per doctor basis to both state and federal regulatory bodies. We see that emerging across the world. But it's not just pharmaceutical. You want to know if your employees are entertaining employees within your company. We call that the buddy meal. Or you want to ensure that employees are spending your limited travel and entertainment dollars in the right way on the right clients, not entertaining their friends, not entertaining fellow coworkers. And last, an automated process can alert the employee and the employer to when there are duplicate transactions, which may be intentional or maybe not intentional, ultimately, which could be fraud. The second component is the manager. Even through an automated travel and expense process, the manager is ultimately still responsible for reviewing and confirming those employees' transactions. With an automated process, a manager has the capabilities to view all of the documentation, because all the required receipts and so forth can be imaged, either scanned, emailed in, or taken a picture with a smartphone. So when the manager has access to that expense claim and it's routed to them, they can see all of the same detail that anyone else who has secure access to that expense claim. Therefore, the manager cannot claim ignorance with regard to not seeing a hard copy of the receipts, or the receipts were lost in the mail, and so forth. Second, the manager can simply return the report to the employee, asking for further clarification and comments regarding why certain information was not included, why aren't receipts attached, or what was the justification for this large expense. And then third, an automated system can alert the manager for certain expense reports or transactions within an expense report that may require additional scrutiny, typically based on company policy. Again, the manager is just as responsible in an automated process as the employee themselves to confirm that the transactions are just and accurate. The third thing I mentioned with regard to the automated approach is smartphone technology. With our 15 million users, approximately 30% of our users today are completing the complete expense claim process with either a smartphone or a tablet. We believe that within the next 2 years, the majority of our end users will access Concur's travel and expense cloud platform via a smartphone or tablet device. But these smartphone or tablet devices, whether you reimburse the employees for them or not, they have them. Many of your employees have a smartphone and may have multiple smartphones, whether provided by the company or not. Smartphones help in a number of ways. Capture the receipts with the smartphone camera. Upload those immediately. Gone can be the excuse, oh, I lost the receipt. I threw it away in XYZ. Smartphone receipts cannot be altered or doctored. Third, enabling employees to complete an expense report in a timely fashion avoids the employee from thinking, did I take a taxi or not? Did I have breakfast or not? No. Your employees incur the expense and immediately record that on their mobile or tablet device, therefore not pondering, well, I should add a breakfast because I'm sure I missed one earlier in the day. Again, conditioning employees to do it right then, and therefore they're no longer having to recall or speculate in terms of what they potentially spent. And fourth, as I mentioned, the manager being a key component of this process, the manager with their smartphone or tablet can see the entire expense claim and all the identifying and supporting information, just as if they were in with their web browser. So gone are the days of you need the frantic phone call that payroll is about to be run and your employees are waiting for their money, and you need to go get to your computer so you can review and just click, approve. No excuses any longer. Once the expense claim is submitted, the manager can immediately act upon it and either approve or send back to the employee. And the last leg of automation is visibility. Robust reporting in terms of who spent what where. And as I mentioned, one of the aspects of what I call, under the limit spending is with reporting. We've had many organizations run and create and run reports, and we offer a standard set where you set your thresholds in terms of what your limits are, and then, as an example, look for employees that are consistently spending within 5% of the limit. They may not be violating your policy, but they may be pushing the limits. Therefore, you may want to more closely scrutinize those employees' expense transactions on an ongoing basis to ensure they're not truly taking advantage of your T&E policy. And with analytics, you clearly understand where you are versus your budget. So there's no surprises at the end of the quarter in terms of overspending or potentially aggressive spending by a given employee who may be engaged in less than noble expense transactions. So we talked about the systemic component of automation. Now let's talk about human expertise. And Annie spent quite a bit of time talking about the independence of an auditor. And let's talk specifically about, now that you've automated, you still require the human element, the physical audit. A physical audit by a human being complements the automation process. It complements in a number of ways. It confirms that the receipt matches ultimately the information entered or captured on a corporate card. It confirms the receipt authenticity. It confirms that the information has been properly classified, whether it be an expense type or capturing proper tax, or potentially capturing what may be billable or non-billable back to a client, depending on your industry. It confirms whether documentation is actually provided or not. It also can provide through the third party direct feedback to the employee when things are in question or things are missing. And then last, by ensuring that what the employee said they're submitting is actually what they're submitting, you have even a more robust data set, as we talked about earlier, to identify potential anomalies. Combined together, leveraging technology to automate the travel booking and expense process from beginning to end with an independent third-party element provides you a best-in-class system to potentially identify and prevent potentially fraudulent transactions. And again, clarifying the difference between automation and the physical. Automation can provide immediate feedback, whether it be to the user, whether it be to the manager of the transactions which are out of policy or potentially out of policy. And there's no interpretation. It's either in or it's out. This needs to be itemized or this does not. This could be a duplicate and so forth. Physical complements that automation through verification and ensuring that what was actually entered and captured actually matches the substantiation. So as we come close to wrapping and turning it back over to Caesar for some questions, let me just leave with you with a few simple tips that your organization, regardless of where you are with regard to automating your travel booking and expense process, could potentially leverage. So what you can do to potentially identify and prevent fraud, whether you have an automated travel and expense process or not. First and foremost, as Annie mentioned, provide a simple, clear, and easy to understand expense policy. Making it clear prevents confusion, prevents interpretation, and best of all, prevents fraud. Second, even though we are the leading provider in travel and expense automation, I would recommend automating. Studies show by the Aberdeen Group from 2011, organizations that have automated their travel and expense process save on average or have increased policy compliance of upwards of 37% through automation. Third, enable your smartphones and your users to utilize smartphones. Whether you have a smartphone policy or not, your business travelers certainly have a smartphone policy that they adhere to. Fourth, fraud occurs many times primarily within cash-based transactions because of the lack of visibility in terms of who spent what where. Minimize cash transactions as much as possible by leveraging multiple forms of payment technologies from providers, such as there's business travel lodge accounts, what they call business travel accounts, where you may not issue employees actually physical plastic corporate card, but employees can charge this account through certain individuals to either book air or hotel, and also hand out a corporate card to the right employees. Corporate payment providers and corporate card issuers have implemented a number of safeguards to potentially identify and certainly prevent fraud from occurring. Net, minimize the cash. And last, since it is a human element, ultimately at the end of the day that's still required with all this automation that I've talked about, consider leveraging a third-party independent auditor who is trained, as Annie was saying, in doing this type of work, analyzing those expense transactions day in and day out against your policy, and it's their only focus. And with that, if you have any other information, here's our contact information. I'll be happy to turn it over to Cesar for questions for Annie and myself.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was really interesting. A reminder, you can still type in your questions inside the Ask a Question box on the left side of your screen and then press the Submit button. You can also download the presentations by clicking on the link at the bottom of the console. I will now open the floor to questions, and the first question is for Annie.
Yes.
I know that there's a global report on fraud. I wonder if we look more closely at simply Asia. How serious is how serious really is fraud among Asian companies?
Well, I would say fraud is very serious, especially in Asia, especially in developing countries in Asia Pacific. As you can see in the Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International, many Asian countries are ranked at the low end, say, for example, Philippines, Indonesia, Myanmar, etc. And as you rightly pointed out, in terms of the report to the nations, on an average, 5% of the revenue was lost because of fraud. Well, as I recall, there was a statistics performed by Tsinghua University. The finding is that in terms of China, 15% was lost to fraud. In
15.
So that's very, very serious. So definitely companies cannot turn a blind eye to expense irregularities or minor fiddling of T&E. And basically, policies and procedures have to be followed, and mechanism has to be in place to monitor the expense claims.
I guess it's fair to say that for ACFE and your own organization, Mazars, the recommendation is not to tolerate even the smallest infraction.
Exactly.
Okay. It's a no tolerance.
Zero tolerance.
Okay.
Zero tolerance.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, because I have heard CFOs actually say, or some people say, it's just $10, it's just $50. Give it to them because they're paid very low. But that is not something that you would recommend, yeah?
No, definitely not, because a small amount can accumulate to a significant amount in the long run. And apart from that, it can expose the company to tremendous risk. Say, for example, the breaching potentially the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or the bribery provisions.
Okay, excellent. The next question is for Chris. Concur has actually examined 200,000 expense reports, in your presentation. Are you seeing more instances of fraud in Asia's companies, perhaps because of the GFC?
Great question. Our customers are reluctant to go on the record saying that they're finding more, but we have anecdotal evidence from ACFE is that when the economy does slow, and of course there's economic headwinds across Asia, that the incidence of fraud due to potentially personal hardship, people getting less raises than smaller salary increases, that there's potential propensity for greater fraud incidences. So we say at Concur is when many times a country's economy slows, our business improves, because organizations are concerned or may uncover things and therefore drive the interest higher in automation. And we are seeing that across Asia Pacific. But I can't directly link that to fraud, but there's anecdotal evidence that the incidence of fraud does increase as the economy slows.
Okay. Let me get back to Annie here. If my company, for example, is interested in hiring a forensic accountant with the objective of assessing fraud detection and prevention processes and putting in place the most effective systems, how much would I need to pay you?
Well, that's a good question. It depends on the type of service that is required. Say, for example, for fraud prevention and fraud risk training, these are, not expensive, probably around a few $1,000 US.
Okay.
It would be a very good starting point. And in terms of a fraud investigation, that would cost around $20,000 to $200,000 US. It depends on the complication.
Okay. Are we talking here about Mazars or about ACFE?
That's talking about Mazars, because ACFE is an educational association. ACFE does not provide fraud investigation services.
But is it possible for a company to invite ACFE to do some training for me?
Yes, that's possible.
Okay, excellent. I will ask the same question of Chris because I imagine implementing an automated D&E solution like Concur is a bit pricey.
A few years back, yes. But now, since we're entirely a cloud-based solution, organizations can automate their expense process alone for as little as $1,000 to $1,500 USD. And depending on the level of complexity, number of countries, maybe upwards of 20,000 USD. So we've driven the cost out of implementation significantly, being a cloud technology.
Okay, and that savings now, of course, would fall directly to the bottom line of the customer.
Absolutely. The key is ultimately getting our customers live as quickly as possible, typically depending on the number of countries. As soon as 4 weeks, and then for the initial country, and 2 to 4 weeks for each additional country beyond that. And then the second component of your question would likely be how much what is the ongoing monthly fee, since we are a service provider. And it depends entirely on the number of expense claims the organization plans on submitting through our technology, and can range as high as 10 USD to as low as $1 USD, depending on the number of transactions and the level of service with regard to the technology and certain features and functions that we can enable for the client.
Okay. Well, it seems like the service is getting commoditized going forward.
It's part of it is commoditization. Part of it is simply is scale. Our ability to continue to where we're leveraging a global platform. previously organizations that would have been able to automate their travel and expense process were the largest of the companies, which with the large IT staffs and the expertise and so forth. And through the cloud has enabled all those barriers to be removed, and that the smallest organizations can now achieve the same benefits that previously would have been unattainable or unaffordable to them.
The final question I'd like to address to Annie, how important is technology, as described by Chris, in fraud detection and prevention? I was wondering whether is it possible for companies to just use spreadsheets or simply not doing anything but just focusing on the honor system and culture, anti-fraud culture across the organization?
Okay. Now, as I see it, nowadays IT and electronic means or devices are commonly used, say, for example, iPhone, iPad, etc., to keep emails, records. So I see that more and more IT tools are used. The tools explained by Chris is very interesting, and I believe that would have an impact in, say, automating the fraud prevention and detection process of companies. And apart from that, I think data analytics, such as using software like ACL, etc., is very common. And apart from that, on a regular basis, we also use computer forensics, say using software like NKs, etc., to say image the computer and duplicate the emails. These are very good tools that we often use in terms of major fraud investigation.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, we've run out of time. We have come to the end of the webinar. Thank you to Annie and Chris for this very illuminating discussion, and thank you for everyone for attending. I hope you will find time to attend our future webinars. Goodbye.